Hello SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded. I will put the full playlist to this series in the description. If you have been following, you would realize what I'm talking about. So we have this 30-degree angle, which is so important to creating a pendulum to measure 1 second, and the metrological link. So metrology is the study of measurement and how ancient systems of measurement will incorporate the modern meter, the second, and blend wonderfully into the ancient Egyptian cubit and other units of measure. But before I get into those, I think it's worth looking at this particular symbolism and doing some added info, but also I've done in previous series the esoteric Hermetic symbolism that we're with. So you might recognize this particular. So firstly, it's a 24-pointed star geometry. It all emerges from the Vesica Pisces and the Seed of Life, which gives you your 6-pointed star or the Star of David, then the 12-pointed star, which gives you a Maltese cross, and then we have this 24-pointed star, which gives you the geometry of the Templar cross, but also it's a wonderful way to draw a 30-degree pendulum. So Knights Templar, we'll see this, so basically you got, that's more like your Templar, Knights of Malta cross, but this is one variation of the Templar cross. Here you'll see other versions of it, and this one here, and this is this geometry, this sacred geometry, the Vesica, so important in architecture across the world, across time, delivers us to this 30 degrees, and that's the emblem there. So the Templars said to have reintroduced knowledge to Europe especially, and then we saw the explosion of cathedral building and grand architecture, but really it was a rediscovery of ancient knowledge, because this goes back to Greco-Roman times. So Knights Templar. Now, aboard on the structure of Freemasonry, where we see the Scottish Rite and where we see the York Rite, 33 steps and 13 steps. Focus on the top here of the York Rite. So you see the Order of the Knights Malta, and you see the same geometry emerging there. The Knights Templar, the Order of the Knights Malta, and the Order of the Red Cross. And you'll see again this inherent geometry embedded into these symbols. Of course, Knights Malta, but for instance, St. John's Ambulance, which is usually in Protestant countries. In Catholic, you'll often have the Order of Malta, and they'll still have the same geometry embedded in there. Also the Red Cross, so Switzerland, a whole bunch of stuff going on there, but the Red Cross we think is more modern. Started relatively, a little bit more than a century ago in Switzerland. Well, yeah, okay, I'll leave that one. But there's another key feature in this particular structure of Freemasonry, and we do a close-up, and you can see there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns. These are the Tuscan. So these are the 5 Roman orders of architecture. The Tuscan column, it's not just a column, it's actually the whole order, but just to begin with the columns, we have the Tuscan, then we have the Doric, then we have the Ionic, and then the Corinthian, and then the composite or Roman composite, which is it's essentially the same as Corinthian, but there are some slight variations, so it's easy to mix those up. So let's go look to the Sydney Masonic Centre. It just happens to be 432 feet high. Nice stuff going on there, but there are 5 rooms. There's the Doric, Tuscan, Doric room, the Ionic room, Ionic Corinthian room, and the composite room. You can even see the styles of architecture there. So some recent uploads I talked about the 3, 5 and 7 steps. So we have the first 3 steps to becoming a master mason: beauty, strength and wisdom. Then we have the 5 steps, which is also described with the 5 orders of Roman architecture. Then we have 7 steps and the 7 liberal arts, including geometry, arithmetic, logic, grammar, rhetoric and astronomy. Here's another example, and this one's a little bit better, because again we see the 3, the 5 and the 7 steps. Do a close-up and we see the composite, Corinthian, Ionic, Doric and Tuscan orders, just like there. But it's also interesting to note that we have connected to these 5 orders, we also have 5 senses. So composite is connected to taste, the Corinthian is connected to smell, Ionic to feeling or touch, the Doric to seeing, and the Tuscan to hearing. And Manitoba Legislative Building in Winnipeg did a series on that as well. So even, yes, there's some really interesting, especially in regards to acoustics, and the Tuscan column is the echo chamber, which sits beneath the Manitoba Legislative Building. But to move on, we also have these first three steps: wisdom, strength, and beauty. And here's an illustration. So we see three columns: wisdom, W, strength, and beauty. But we also see the Ionic column, the Doric column, and the Corinthian column. Strength, wisdom, and beauty. Ionic, Doric, and Corinthian, the three Greek orders of architecture. So on the 5 steps we have the 5, but Corinthian, Ionic, and Doric are the Greek orders, and the 5 orders are said to be Roman. 10 books of architecture by Vitruvius. It's not just it's got a lot to do with the technology of lifting and of making dyes and colors and alchemy in general, the philosophy of city design, but also details for proportions and the details and the decorations that separate each of these 5 orders of architecture. So these orders of architecture are not just about the column themselves, they're about the greater design and proportions of the temple. And so like another Mason board, you'll see the Doric, the Corinthian, and the Ionic. It's a very important feature also in regards to the structure of Freemasonic organizations and moving up the various steps. Here's another more classical tracing board: Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian. It's also worth noticing we have the tools of masonry, such as the mallet, the chisel, the trowel of the tiler, the compass, the ruler, the plumb line to make a level. That's a level to find horizontal, and it's a plumb line, another important feature to find the level of the vertical. These are the emblems, and they derive from the ancient Masons. Very, very ancient symbolism. So just to move away from the illustrations, this is a Doric column. When you see these swirls, that's the Ionic, and there we have a Corinthian column capital. These are the 3 Greek orders of architecture, but it's more than just the column capitals. So here's an illustration where we see the 5 orders, and now I've just highlighted. So we have the Doric, the Ionic, and the Corinthian. Now at the top of the Doric order, you have these 3 bars, which are called the Triglyph, and you have the gutta, which represent droplets. But these also so the original Doric order was based, which represents the male. Before they started working in stone, they were working in timber, and so a tree log is the origin of the original Doric, and the triglyphs above here are a representation of the joinery, where the beams would sit above the column, and it's just moved from a wooden style into a stoneworking style. These guttae, or sometimes called the droplets, represent the old-fashioned dowels or the wooden nails that they would use to lock in these beams above the Doric order columns. Doric is a very simple design. As where you move to the Ionic with those swirls, well, now they start to introduce much more detailed decorations of the columns themselves, and then we move to the Corinthian order, which is a very detailed form of architecture, and the columns themselves are much more, the temples themselves and that order of architecture is much more detailed and in its decoration. So it's for instance, above you'll see these features above the Corinthian corbels as well. So as you move to, and even like the little details above the corbels, Corinthian order is much more detailed, sophisticated, complex. So Roman temple, this is the temple of Bacchus in Baalbek in Lebanon, and you can see Corinthian columns and this much more detailed design on the architrave and frieze in itself. But it's more than that. So on the inside we see these colonnades, so they're freestanding columns, and you have these columns embedded in the wall. But just as an example, we see the Corinthian order of architecture based on the acanthus leaf. But again, it's much more than just the columns. So for instance, this is the famous massive door, at the Temple of Bacchus in Baalbek. And in the 10 Books of Architecture by Vitruvius, he details the orders of architecture, the proportions of the column, the detail and decorations of the temples, but also these trapezoidal doors. So there again he talks about the various proportions. So there's a difference between Doric and Corinthian of these trapezoidal doors, which will bring us to Freemasonry. So this is a Sam Houston statue in Texas. Now we see the compass and square, famous compass and square, but you'll also notice that the square is also a ruler. It's a system of measurement. So just like in the Masonic tracing boards, you'll see the ruler has a measurement system, and it's so important to, so whether it's a trapezoidal door, the column, the decorations, you need to be able to measure them and get the proportions in detail. Again, in Vitruvius, 10 Books of Architecture, he details this very, very carefully. But these are Masonic emblems, and so modern Masonry has its roots and its symbols in very ancient forms of architecture and the technology of the time. Now, even the word geometry, geo is earth and metry is measure. Meter is essentially an ancient Greek word for measurement. So we see the ruler, and these are systems of geometry and measurement. You're not doing any stone masonry, you're not building any temples unless you've mastered these disciplines. They're very important. Still the root of modern science. As an example in connection to, so faith, hope and charity, which are also important themes in cathedrals. But this is the Royal Prince Alfred Hospital in Sydney, and it was strong Masonic connections. It was founded on a donation by Grand Master William Weil, who intervened to save Prince Alfred, Queen Victoria's son, from an assassin. He was given a large donation. He gave that donation to found the Prince Alfred Hospital. Again, pardon the typo, Royal Prince Alfred Hospital. But just out the front door you'll see, now abideth faith, hope and charity. Faith, hope and charity. It's very, and I did a video on it. It's full of the measurements as well. But it's also important to note there are 3 levels, and each of these levels is defined by a different order of architecture. So we have the Doric column, then we have the Ionic column, and then we have the Corinthian column. Now even the Parliament and these, which have their origins in ancient Egypt as well. This is very old. So for instance, the famous Colosseum in Rome, you have these 3 levels, and again it's Doric, Ionic and Corinthian. Back to the Sydney Masonic Centre there in the museum, we have Corinthian, Doric and Ionic. It's also worth noting the plumb line. You can even see above the columns how they separate these. So it's not just about the capital on top, it's about the forms of decoration above and in and around the structure itself. Again, tools of masonry, the level and the builder square, compass, etc. And again, the mallet and the chisel and stoneworking tools, and the acacia there linked to Hiram Abiff. Inside the museum, again, just another example of that tracing board, Doric, Ionic and Corinthian columns, and again the tools of the mason. Doric, Ionic, Corinthian. Older example of this illustration, because these orders also have symbolism as well, in that the Doric represents the male, it's the column of strength, it's related to sight. The Ionic column is the column of wisdom, related to the woman, and it's related to feeling. And then we have the Corinthian column, which is related to the virgin or the maiden. It's called the column of beauty, and it's related to the sense of smell. So that's a famous Mambo artist, Reg Mombassa, but strength, wisdom and beauty. Older versions, and again, so these are important features. And this is in Ghent in Belgium. See beauty, strength and wisdom just translated, but strength, beauty and wisdom, again these 3 orders, and it's implanted in different ways. So these are very important themes, the symbolism and the connections and the ancient writings in regards to these as well, to detail their origin, and it's passed on through Greco-Roman times, and the Greco-Romans were the heirs of older streams of knowledge, India, Mesopotamia and Egypt. Again, they're not ashamed of saying it. They clearly wrote so in their ancient texts as well. Have a good one. More to come.